Welcome, everybody. One of the areas where there is the most obvious conflict between stated principles and actions in the real world is when it comes to freedom of speech and non-intervention from the modern right wing and Republican Party, which has advocated very loudly for a long time for more freedom of speech and less intervention of any kind unless absolutely necessary, except as we increasingly see in so many areas, including the areas of education and when it comes to book bans. And the sort of highlight, the top level statistic that we start with today is that in the 2023-2024 school year, that's the school year we're currently still in, the number of book bans has exploded to a record 4,000 and climbing this school year so far. And we're going to look at all of the data and then talk about why this is so disastrous. Let's take a look. This is from PEN America, which is their slogan is the freedom to write, and they are advocates for educational freedom, actual freedom of speech, etc. Key takeaways: bans are speeding up, more than 4,000 in the first half of this school year and more than all of last school year in total. It is a nationwide campaign. There have been banning activities in 42 states. This is happening in blue and red districts, but when you see where this is focused, you will very quickly see the right-wing bent to this. Those who want to ban books are attempting to use obscenity law and hyperbolic rhetoric about porn in schools to justify banning books, often for sexual violence or LGBTQ plus topics. Trans identity is very popular, and disproportionate targeting of books by women and books by non-binary authors is taking place. They also are focusing on themes of race and racism by advancing rhetoric disparaging critical race theory, woke ideology, and efforts to ensure library collections are diverse and inclusive. So 4,349 book bans in the fall of 2023. If we look around the country, well, first of all, you will see the numbers going up dramatically, as you can see on a per semester basis, very, very, very high. And if you look around the country, you will see that the largest numbers are in Florida and Texas, which makes sense because Florida and Texas have passed specific bills seeking to do exactly that. You then see close behind Pennsylvania, Wisconsin rather, and then Utah, Missouri, and Tennessee, and then subsequently other numbers. Some states we have no data for altogether. There's lots of examples of the types of books that are banned. Number one, any kind of sexual violence is being banned under the premise that it is pornographic in nature. We have number two, a continued hostility towards LGBTQ plus books. And then we have number three, transgender narratives, which are being targeted. So it's all the normal stuff. We also continue to see a backlash against so-called critical race theory. And we see vocal individuals or small groups disempowering parents and students. So let me review once again with you the core of this. I don't think the right response to this from the left should be any material whatsoever is appropriate for 6-year-olds. And of course, no one is saying that. And much of this movement is premised against the idea, it's premised on the idea that what the right needs to fight against is woke left-wing educators who want to put the most lurid, violent, and sexually provocative materials in the curriculum of first graders. And of course, that's not the case. And what's really important to remember is that many times the subject of controversy is a book available in a high school library, and it is presented as if it is part of the curriculum for first graders. There is a lack of distinction here where these materials are just mentioned as part of some larger glob, so to speak, with no discrimination made between a book that may simply be available in the school library if a high school senior wants it, versus the idea that first, second, and third grade teachers are including some of these materials in the required curricula for 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. So my view on this remains what it has been for several years, which is, number one, we are saying they on the right are saying they don't want government intervening except when totally necessary. And yet what you are doing when you do these kinds of book bans is you're taking educators out of it. And you were saying, I don't know, random parents know just as much about what's appropriate and where and in what context as do the professional educators, mostly with master's degrees in doing exactly this sort of work. There's an overemphasis of particular types of content. Like I said, right now it's very trendy to focus on books by trans authors, non-binary characters, etc. You ignore the actual impact that this has on academic freedom. Because if you really want freedom of speech, no matter what it is you believe is the right material for what age student, when these individuals and groups and parents come in over the top and say, this is what is appropriate, you're impacting academic freedom more broadly. Now, they don't care because they believe academic freedom means liberal indoctrination. But if you're actually going to stand for this non-intervention, let the professionals do what they do best sort of perspective, then you have to allow them to make those decisions. And again, as I said, curriculum versus library standards, elementary school, middle school, high school, there should really be different standards and a different evaluation here. What are books that are part of a curriculum in an elementary school has a different answer than what books should simply be available in a high school library, different books, different ages. And so this debate is touching on a bunch of different issues. It does touch on educational philosophy. And there is no doubt that if you want to pull your kids out of public school, put them into whatever sort, oftentimes it's Christian homeschooling that is a big thing. The decisions about curriculum that are made there, go ahead and make them however you want. And parents can feel free to do that. The imposition on professional educators in a public school setting, the rights of students to access diverse materials for them to be available, and then students and parents and teachers and whoever can consult on what is right for whom, but taking away the freedom of these materials being available is not in line with the free speech position that many of these right-wingers claim to take. And then, of course, when you have a decision-making framework, I don't deny, and I don't really know anyone on the left who denies that parents should have input, but to have these angry, raging parents showing up screaming at PTA meetings or school board meetings or whatever it is, and saying they know better than the professionals who do this for a living, they don't respect that expertise. They don't respect the distinct roles that exist in librarians and teachers and superintendents and principals, etc. So this is another example of they claim to be about free speech and diversity of ideas, but they want to take away a whole bunch of that based on their personal predilections when it comes to libraries and curricula, and they don't actually stand by the principles they claim to stand by. So we are seeing it rise. Every time this comes up, I get a couple of emails. You'll see it in the YouTube comments, right-wingers saying, there aren't really any book bans in Florida or Texas because the books are still allowed to be sold in bookstores. And that, of course, completely circumvents the reality that we're talking about banning books in an educational context, in a public school context, which is where most students are getting their education. So more of the same, more of what we've come to expect. What will turn this around? Not the election of Donald Trump. That I can assure you. It is time to start thinking like voters and to make sure that kids understand the importance of voting, how it works, registering, ballot initiatives, because so many kids just have no idea. That's why I wrote the new children's book, Think Like a Voter. I can think of no better time and no more important group of folks to try to reach. The book is now available at davidpakman.com/book, where, by the way, you can get the first 2 books in the series as well. Think Like a Detective and Think Like a Scientist. Really important stuff. Donate them to local libraries, classrooms, read them with the kids. davidpakman.com/book.